with this CT guided or CBCT. It has some limitations like poor soft tissue contrast, additional ionizing radiation for imaging, and difficulty with real-time organ motion and adaptation. So why we need this MRI? Because of we can do MR only planning, which avoids dual scans with CT. It also avoids that extra radiation dose for better soft tissue visualization, contrast, and real-time imaging and adaptive treatment, and further characterization of tissue biology is also possible with MRI. So we have been using this MRI for quite a lot of time. Like in offline, we have been using this CT MRI fuse for taking help during contusing. We are doing this MRI only planning. MR, RT, Linux are available where we can do this imaging, do the planning and transfer to our Linux. Nowadays, this online or integrated MRI with teletherapy, especially the Linux, have been available, which ensures MRI only planning, real-time correction, and adaptive treatment, and avoids intra and interfraction errors. So commercially, at present, there are two systems which are available: the high field 1.5 Tesla with Linux and 0.35 Tesla low field MRI integrated with Linux. So basically, the TPS, our treatment planning system, it requires electron density information for dosimetric analysis, but MRI doesn't provide this to us. So we can't do the planning on an MRI. So we need something that can convert this MRI into a CT scan data set. So those CT scan data sets are known as synthetic CT. So synthetic CT are basically CT equivalent data set which have been obtained from an already imaged MRI. They provides Hounsfield unit maps which enables the MRI only workflows. So these are some of the pictures. This is MRI. This is a true CT scan of the same patient, and this is a synthetic CT which has been derived from this MRI by software reconstruction. So it may not exactly be the same, there might be some difference between these two. So basically with synthetic CT we are just trying to catch up with the CT technology we have. But one thing which we have to observe with our student eye is how this synthetic generation is done. Earlier it was done with bulk density assignment, then came this atlas based, nowadays the AI driven methods. So they all have their shortcomings, and this is what we need to keep on. Earlier, suppose this is our MRI, this is a 2CT, but when we convert this MRI into a synthetic CT, this was what was done by the software. This will take the whole as a water equivalent Hounsfield unit. So the detailing of our MRI has now, in this case, has become useless. But this is what is done with the atlas based ones or the bulk density based ones. So it is not as accurate as the existing MRI. We are just trying to have a transition in between. So this is the atlas based. In the atlas based, around many atlas of the same looking MRI we are collecting, and we are comparing our MRI with the nearest possible atlas available. So we assume that this atlas is equivalent, this atlas CT is equivalent to our obtained MRI. So with the help of those HU units from that CT, we will do the planning. Nowadays AI based SCT generations have come. It uses this deep learning methods like the GAN, and the other algorithms are CNN, UNet, ResNet, and in ML we have random forest maps. So basically all these have their own limitations, which I think it is not possible to go into the details. So this is an MRI, and this is a synthetic CT generated from that MRI with the help of MRCAD softwares. So this is the whole process. Now workflow of MR only radiotherapy, MRI acquisition, pre-processing, then synthetic city generation, TPS planning, then our QA approval, and also it includes in between this adaptive replanning, real-time imaging and use of gating for online gated MRI guided radiotherapy. So MRI Linac enables daily MRI, daily SCT generation, then adaptive replanning. But it looks so simple and so easy, but it is not that easy and that accurate. This online adaptive planning, basically it is not 3D, it is 2D, but nobody is going to tell you that. It is still 2D, the adaptive planning is 2D, and every process is manual, it is not automated or segmented. So at all these online process, physically the different manpowers, they have to be available there and they have to do it manually, and it takes a lot of time. So this is regarding this, like this is in first fraction, this was the GTV, while it has shrunk in the second one. This adaptive technology can compensate for this change in the tumor volume, but this is still in 2D. So these are some of the sequences. I am not going into the details. Pre-processing, then this SCT generation, but this SCT has to be, synthetic CT has to be validated with phantom studies, and a individualized patient-specific QA must be done. So basically every step is making you more time intensive and labor intensive. So at present, like in prostate, in brain, in pelvis, all these MRCAT software which converts this MRI from MRI to synthetic CT, they are FDA approved and they are validated. But still, like in neck and for some other vendors, the spine, they are still not FDA approved. They are still a work in progress or only limited to research. But they are selling it, so with that, I think that it will be validated, but it is not so. Like in prostate delineation, MRI only planning is validated with a mean difference of less than 1% with the actual CT. In prostate, MRI improves delineation and has shown dose difference under 1% compared to CT. But these are the things which are shown to us by different studies that everything is well. So these are different applications, like in head and neck, there is complex anatomy where we need better tissue, soft tissue visualization. In especially those areas where the body landmarks are less, like in cervix, rectum, bladder. So we think that MRI only planning or MRI radiotherapy eliminates CT scan dose, better tumor OR, deletion, avoids fusion errors and efficient workflows. But there are some challenges, there are some pitfalls which we have to keep in mind. That both these integrated MR Linac, they are still falling behind CR, rotational or robotic Linac systems equipped with our CBCT or even our planar image guidance. They are restricted to delivery of one single photon energy. We can't have the liberty of 2 or 3 photon energies. They don't have electrons. And we can't do VMAT. We have to at the most do a static IMRT, step and switch IMRT. We can't do non-coplanar treatment because of the arrangements of the MRI integrated into the Linac. The inner bore is usually 70 center, which restricts us with the use of immobilizing devices. And they do not currently perform dynamic motion correction using MLC, gauge or robotic tumor tracking. One very promise was the individual cancer biology, but till date it has not been achieved in even a single tumor entity. There is increased requirements regarding MR safety for patient staff, more complex patient positioning including coil placement, lack of image-based radiotherapy, additional time requirements, and after the adaptive planning for gating also we need additional time requirements. So this leads to increased treatment times and less patient throughput. Personal requirement is more because of lack of automation, time-consuming manual interactions, and the radiotherapy flow requires clinicians, medical physicists, RTTs. They have to be physically present at the treatment machine, further impacting the treatment times. The cost, very high installation cost and running cost. The company which was manufacturing and selling this 0.35 Tesla MR Linac has filed for its bankruptcy because it could not sell that number of machines which it was supposed to sell. So this is one area, magnetic field modulated dose deposition. This is basically a boon as well as a bane. It is a bane because it causes electron perturbations. As a result, the electrons, which are the secondary carriers of energy when we treat with radiation, they are attracted towards the surface. So the surface dose, skin surface dose is increasing. So this abolishes our advantage of skin sparing with megavoltage radiotherapy. But in certain situations where we are treating these superficial tumors, it can be beneficial. And these gradients, dose gradients, they are up to 30%. This is not a small number. So basically these are some of the challenges other than those I have mentioned: MRI distortions, bone differentiation, HU assignment errors, AI model dependency. But there is light at the end of tunnel. Patient individual adaptation with full adaptive planning is responsible for major benefits of this approach, with improved PT coverage and maintaining safe OAR constraints compared to non-adaptive approach. But we have to identify patient individual factors which are predictive of such a benefit with this approach. We cannot apply this for all our patients because it is very time consuming and high cost. So there was the first prospective randomized study to compare online adaptive MR to CBCT guided SBRT in prostate cancer, which has shown an impressive and significant reduction in acute toxicity. Still the tumor control is equivalent. So BGRT is biologically guided radiotherapy. Adaptation still is based on geometric assumptions. It is still not based on biology, but this can be a future where MRI based biomarkers can be used for adaptation of dose, volume and fractionation. Selected applications of advanced imaging with this biology, MRI biology, can be MR fingerprinting, diffusion imaging, especially in case of rectal and head and neck, early regression index, RO selective signal changes, and longitudinal intratumoral radiomix changes. Basically, it brings into play the radiomix imaging axis. So there are some areas of further exploration, like still there is no seamless integration with dose rate Linacs, because still the dose rate of the Linacs which are integrated are very less, and MRI guided platforms can be integrated with proton channel. And also AI enabled online MRI guided flows, because this is the actual, which is the pre-treatment, the whole main process which takes even up to days. And this is the smaller process of this adaptive online replanning, which is supposed to take only 2 minutes but is still taking hours. So AI can help with that. Then synthetic CT, MRCAT softwares, we have to be very shrewd to find out whether all these software packages, they are validated and FDA approved, but still most of the sites are not FDA approved. Because we cannot build a beautiful big house on a single fulcrum. So these are some of the validation studies and future directions. Universal AI models must be there, because still they are company specific, better and cost effective MRI Linac designs, better MRI integration, and global QA guidelines. Still they are lacking. So in summary, finding challenges is key to finding the solutions. With active exploration, better designs and use of AI in automation, as CT scan guided radiotherapy is the normal now, in future MRI guided radiotherapy may be the future of precision RT. So these are some of the references. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Even the patients coming and asking.
Motion management concept need option in future by Dr. Saran Singh sir, Head of the Department, Kalyan Super.
Good morning, all of you, Madam Chairpersons, and it is indeed a privilege and many thanks to organizers for giving me this opportunity. So, as we all know that we are not living in a static world, and as doctors we don't want flat ECGs, and when they move, they are difficult to hit. And as we know, we are moving to more and more complexity. Initially it were bony landmarks, nowadays it is adaptive planning, so much more precisely we plan, more misses we can encounter. So why are motion management techniques necessary? Because of the image artifacts which are being created, dose delivery artifacts which are being created during the dose delivery, counts of margins we are including, and of course taking all into encompassing all the volumes. Ultimately we land most of the times having very large volumes which result in large amount of tissue being irradiated. So as we move to larger volumes, it becomes more important that we control motion, because we may not only miss the tumor, we may end up irradiating large volumes. As we know that these motions can broadly be of two types, intrafraction and interfraction. Both of them lead to increasing the normal tissue toxicity as well as chances of missing the tumor precisely. Conventional CT misses most of the tumors, whereas a gated CT has a high probability that we can encompass the tumor because of the gated reconstruction of the tumor volume. And we also know that not only the motion, the anatomy, sometimes the anatomy is also a hindrance where it is not possible to precisely deliver without managing the motion. So most of the challenges arise from organs like lung, liver, pancreas, esophagus, breast, kidneys and prostate. And although the extent of tumor displacement varies with site and organ, it is most pronounced in lung cancer. Studies have shown that lung tumors can move several centimeters, as we all know, during our day-to-day. And as we know the concept of volume, even a small increment of 2 mm can lead to 175% increase in volumes irradiated. So the magnitude of motion has to be very small, but that is unfortunately not possible most of the times. So what are the solutions? Solutions are that we go for such volumes which can encompass the tumor in real time by having the concept of internal target volume. We can have 4D CTs, we can have gatings, respiratory gatings, whereon we put on the beam only during the specific breathing phases of the treatment cycle. Then of course breath hold, which we all know is not very practically feasible most of the times. Other than that, training the patient very meticulously how to train his or her breathing during the treatment. Forced shallow breathing and compression, these are older techniques, these are useful with those patients who have a good KP score during treatment, but as we all know, it is very difficult to train illiterate patients who are not very intelligent often to follow or have several physiological problems. Then there is a real-time tracking solutions, as we all know, CyberKnife, Calypso, and as just Dr. Mittal elucidated very beautifully, MR-Linac. So options for motion management can be gating, tracking, abdominal compression, breath hold, and of course imaging. These are the various devices, as we all know, RPM, RGSC system from Varian or Electran, ABC, active breath hold component system, Calypso, CyberKnife Synchrony system, Exact Track, and SGRT, the optical tracking system. Planning concepts remain more or less the same. We add an internal target volume to account for the tumor motion. This, of course, increases the volume in real time. We anticipate tumor motion and compensate for systemic lag, and by using predictive models. Reposition the beam methods can be slow CT, inhalation and exhalation, breath hold CT, abdominal compression. 4D CT captures full respiratory cycle and has the best temporal timeline information for motion management. Slow CT, as we all know, the CT is operated very slowly. Multiple CT scans are averaged. CT scan operates at particular couch positions. Anatomy delineation shows scanning is more advantageous, and peripheral lung tumors can be treated. The disadvantages being motion artifacts and respiratory motion changes between imaging and treatment. Inhalation and exhalation breath hold CT, they can be done, and fusion of both can be done. Motion artifacts can be reduced, and patients who have ability to hold breath can be treated. Deep inhale and free breathing increases lung volume to many times, and heart moves. This picture shows very beautifully a free breathing makes heart vulnerable for irradiation, whereas a deep inhale can reduce the volume of the heart irradiated and protect the normal heart. This is a photo of an abdominal compression device. It is very helpful for upper abdominal region like liver and pancreas treatments. Then a 4D CT scan. This is a CT scan tube which rotates and collects data in a cineaxial mode. Data is collected for complete. Off table moves to next position, collects data again until full coverage of the scan is obtained. Patient abdominal motion is recorded in precise temporal correlation and images are reconstructed with temporal information to form the 4D CT set. This can be done through two ways, retrospective and prospective. Retrospective is through RPM gating system where image is acquired and couch positions are noted. In prospective mode, scanning or beam delivery is triggered only when the patient's breathing signal reaches a specific amplitude, usually at peak inhalation during a breath hold. This ensures that images or radiation are acquired only within a stable respiratory phase, and it improves accuracy and reduces motion artifacts. And expiratory exhale breath hold. This is another technique, and this has the advantage: if the patient can hold the breath, he or she can hold it. If the patient cannot hold it, average it. Balance setup margin within the motion range. Compression through pedal or belt may help in this process. And gating windows for certain phases can be done. Tracking and predictives are more unreliable, so they are used less now. 4D CT planning, it draws target volume with precise motion information. Treatment has increased likelihood to increase the target dose during delivery of the treatment dose. So treatment thresholds can be, and it's best for lung, liver, pancreas tumors. Colored intensity projections, it visualizes motion amplitude and internal target volume definitions are done. The colors show the different kind of movements, where the gray scale defines the tumor area where the tumor moves and therefore has a high probability of hitting the target. Maximum intensity projection, it highlights tumor extent and is useful as SBRT and ITV delineation. Minimum intensity projection it shows treatment phases during the treatment of lung, parenchyma and ducts, how to avoid the dosage to normal parts of the lung. And average intensity projection, it takes into all of the range of the motion and thus accounting for a clear picture how to treat. Then coming to another aspect of motion management, that is optical tracking. This is one of the current hot topics of motion management and has built upon the whole industry, which runs into millions and millions of dollars. SGRT is surface guided radiotherapy, whereby surface tracking of the tumor of the volumes are done by using 3 cameras which are positioned in the treatment room, and each camera pod is capable of measuring independently the location of the surface. Radiation beam is only activated once the patient is correctly in the place, and beam is automatically held if the patient moves. So real-time tracking can be done without increasing the radiation dose to the patient. DIPH with SGRT for breast cancer is a very useful technique, and we at our center, we are fortunate to have this technology very early on. As of now, even as I speak, about almost 1,000 treatments we have done in last 3 years. And this is a wonderful technique, so much so that we are now moving to tattoo-less planning for in real time. Calypso system, this was another system whereby treatment tracking was done. I think this is not very much in vogue now. The most important thing in this was wireless miniature beacon transponders, which when implanted into the volume used to help track the motion of the volumes. MR-Linac, Dr. Mittal has just elucidated. It is a real-time comprehensive motion management solution, and it is a new field, very developing field. Elekta has come up with a Unity solution whereby artificial intelligence integrates the adaptive planning in real time and thereby reduces the time. So much so that the initial times, which were on an average 1.5 to 2 hours for a normal prostate treatment, have come down to less than 25 minutes now for one patient. Then there is CyberKnife system. CyberKnife system, as we all know, this is a orthogonal X-ray imagers are there and imaging detectors are there. There is a synchrony respiratory camera. There is a vest which is placed on the patient's chest, and it tracks real-time tumor motion through, and it continuously monitors the optical marker space on the patient's chest. and these external markers reflect the patient's breathing pattern, which is correlated with tumor's internal motion. So as the tumor is moving, the fiducials are being tracked, which also move with the target. And this is a real-time, beautiful monitoring of the, and now the latest systems, and we are fortunate at Kalyan Singh to being installing, we are in the process of installing our CyberKnife, which has a multi-leaf collimator also, which will reduce more of the treated volumes. Unnecessary volumes will be reduced. So all these create a correlation volume, which is being tracked. As soon as the target misses out of this, moves out of the correlation volume, the treatment stops. And when it again comes into the correlation volume, the treatment restarts. The same concept in a slightly different manner is being utilized in the tomotherapy unit also, whereby the KV detectors and MP detectors continuously monitor the target, and as the tumor moves during the breathing, the JAWS and MLC automatically adjust to the beam, and the beam is kept aligned. The progress of AI in 4D imaging, as we all know that AI is now into 4D CT, it is in 4D PET and 4D MRI and 4D CT. And all these ultimately help in improving the motion estimation, artifact reduction and image reconstruction. We are also in the process of moving in this direction. Our first PET CT for biological planning is under installation, and there is AI solution for radiotherapy planning in this. So basically the AI assisted 4D imaging and radiation oncology involves the following steps: acquisition of the images, reconstruction, phase billing of the data according to the phases of respiration, post-processing and motion estimation, target delineation and treatment planning and treatment delivery. All the AI supports the entire 4D imaging workflow from acquisition and reconstruction to motion estimation and treatment planning, part of artificial intelligence, whereby the artificial intelligence captures the data from the past treatments and assimilates it with the required treatment in the current patient in question. An application of deep learning in motion management is by detecting and predicting tumor motion both with and without markers, and by enabling smart gating and real-time adaptive radiotherapy. So, what can AI help in motion management? Through improved image quality, accelerated acquisition and processing of 4D images, more accurate motion modeling, and reduced manual intervention and cost by saving the time. Recently, Varian has came up with a solution of HyperSight, which reduces the treatment time drastically. And what are the limitations? Limitations are many because this is a new phenomena and more evidence is required. It has not been fully integrated into the clinical practice, as Dr. Mittal mentioned very well, that 4D MRI is an island in the radiation oncology department. Those who have seen the 4D, this MRI workflow, know that it is a department within the department. It requires lots of time for one patient. So at the maximum, most of the departments are doing 5 to 7 patients per day only on the MR lineup. And it is a one-sided evaluation. Despite the extensive study, the evaluation standards are still not in place, so we don't know where we are heading. Absence of public data sets, it's a relatively new field, and lack of huge amount of data to validate this. So in summary, most reduction of the volume is the ultimate target, and defining of all these volumes for respiratory motion management should ultimately lead to less and less volume treated, more and more tumor encompassing, and low doses to normal tissues. So advanced structures. So in principle, there are two major issues when dealing with breathing motion. Tumor moves rapidly as the patient is either imaged or treated, and location of tumor at any specific phase can change with time. In either case, a quantitative understanding of the magnitude of motion needs to be assessed to determine if motion management is necessary or appropriate. Patient cooperation is necessary for rather they cause patient discomfort, and it is mostly a well-informed and cooperating patient who benefits most from these techniques. And even though different techniques have been developed, the implementation of treatment continues to be very challenging. Sensitive tracking failure detection methods should be employed for any tracking technique, and no matter how accurate and precise the model is, when introducing it into clinical use, the model must be verified and adjusted according to patient's current breathing patterns. The future outlook is integration of on-table imaging plus plan adaptation during real-time treatment implementation and delivery. An integration of predictive algorithms for respiratory modeling for individual patients, non-invasive tracking, and motion management is expected to merge with real-time adaptive workflows. Thank you. That's my department at Kalyan.
The deep insights of motion management. Thank you. Indeed, it will help the residents here. Thank you so much.
A lot of thanks to the chairperson, organizing committee, and all delegates. Today, my topic is role of molecular marker in management of head and neck cancer. In our India, there is a rapid increase in the incidence of head and neck cancer compared to the other countries of the world. And as we see the outcome improvement in India over last 2 decades, the global survival improved by 12%, but in India it has improved by 14%. But still, we are 15% lower due to the later adoption of the current modern RT late stage presentation and sources disparities. So, molecular etiopathogenesis of head and neck cancer. Head and neck squamous cell carcinoma arises from the mucosal epithelium of aerodigestive tract. It is driven by a combination of genetic mutation, epigenetic dysregulation, microenvironmental influence, and oncogenic infections. There are 2 major etiological pathways which are recognized. That is one, tobacco-associated pathway, and the key mechanism is genotoxic carcinogens in tobacco and alcohol cause the DNA adduct and oxidative stress. And this leads stepwise accumulation of genetic mutation that leads to the progression of dysplasia, carcinoma in situ, and finally into the invasive cancer. Here are the major pathways and their effects. That is P53 mutations, that is the most occurs in 70 to 80% head and neck cancer patients. That leads to the loss of tumor suppression function, genomic instability, and apoptosis resistance. CDK and 2A inactivation that leads to the cell cycle dysregulation and RP inactivation. And EGFR overexpression, that is the most common in 80 to 90% of the patient, that leads to increase in the growth signal and proliferation and survival. NOS1 mutation leads to loss of epithelium differentiation control. PIK3 mTOR activation leads to cell growth, metabolism, and invasion. HRAS mutation, oncogenic MAG activation, and chromosomal instability. So, other pathway is HPV associated pathway. That is because of the viral proteins E6, 7, and E5. This leads to dysregulation of P53 and antipoptosis. E7 leads to inactivate RB, unchecked entry to S phase, and increased P16 expression. And E5 enhance EGFR signaling. So here is a final summary of all these pathways, and ultimately these leads to the proliferation, invasion, and metastasis. So what are the molecular markers? Molecular markers are DNA, RNA, protein, and metabolic signatures. They have prognostic, predictive, and diagnostic roles, and they enable personalized radiotherapy and improve outcome and reduce toxicity. Timeline of the biomarker in advanced head and neck cancer. In 2006, Bonner trial that has shown the role of EGFR targeting along with the radiotherapy, and 2010 and et al. Has shown HPV proven major prognostic marker. 2016 and 20 liquid biopsy has emerged that has played a big role in early detection of the cancer as well as to find the prognosis and finding the early recurrence. And 2019 keynote trial that has shown PD-L1 guided immunotherapy, and now it is radiogenomics and adaptive radiotherapy using the biomarkers. So here, as I have shown, the major studies that has paved the way for incorporating molecular markers in the management of head and neck cancer or and et al. That has shown SPB positive oropharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma have superior survival. Bonner et al. Has shown that cetuximab with radiotherapy improves survival versus RT alone. And keynote trial that has shown pembrolizumab benefits in PD-L1 positive head and neck cancer. And Danish Head and Neck Cancer Association trial has shown hypoxia modification improves the radiotherapy outcome. So here we can see the improvement of the overall survival in head and neck SPB positive oropharyngeal cancer patients. Now Bonner et al. Has shown that is landmark phase 3 trial in locally advanced head and neck cancer in comparing radiotherapy alone versus radiotherapy with cetuximab and has shown improved median overall survival 49 months compared to 29 months with RD alone. And the 5-year overall survival was 45% versus 33%. And median progression-free survival was 24 months versus 14.9 months, and local regional control improved with the cetuximab. Here we can see the improvement in the overall survival incorporating cetuximab with the radiotherapy. Here is the conceptual overall survival curve. And there was no major change in the toxicity with the using cetuximab. So, in modern perspective, the this trial was done pre-SPB era, and still cisplatin remains the stand for fit patient, but cetuximab plus RT is valuable in cisplatin in eligible patient, renal dysfunction patient, neuropathy and hearing loss patient, and elderly frail patients. So it has established cetuximab as a radiation sensitizer in locally advanced head and neck cancer, improving survival without amplifying leukocytes, especially relevant for cisplatin unfit patients. Now keynote 48 trial, that is phase 3 trial in recurrent metastatic head and neck cancer patient comparing pembrolizumab versus cetuximab and PD-L1 CPS guided immunotherapy has shown the benefit, and it has replaced extreme regime as standard of the care. Here we can see improvement in the overall survival with the incorporation of immunotherapy. So the key result was pembrolizumab monotherapy. Median overall survival improved from 10.7 months to 14.9 months, better tolerability, and it is recommended when there is rapid disease control is needed, and immunotherapy transforms survival in PD-L1 expressing tumors. Here is the conceptual overall survival curve. So CPS, that is combined positive score. It is PD-L1 expression scoring system used to select patients for immunotherapy in head and neck cancer. And so clinical conclusion is pembrolizumab is now first line standard in recurrent and metastatic head and neck cancer patients. And treatment selection is based on CPS score, disease burden, and patient fitness and symptoms. Then Dhanka pathway, that is hypoxia targeted radiotherapy in head and neck cancer. It has shown that identifying patient at stepwise, it has identified the patient at risk of tumor hypoxia in SPB negative patients and identified the hypoxia markers. And it radiotherapy optimization according to the hypoxia, that is accelerated radiotherapy in hypoxia site of the tumors, and this has reduced the overall treatment time, and it incorporated the hypoxia modifying agents like nimorolol along with the radiotherapy. And now modern extension is the hypoxia PET guidance and dose painting to the hypoxic subvolume. Here is the conceptual curve showing the low hypoxia marker have better prognosis compared to the high hypoxia markers. So the key biomarkers in head and neck cancer are HPV P16, EGFR overexpression, PD-L1 expression, T53 mutations, hypoxia markers, and radiation toxicity biomarkers. Here is the illustrative biomarker prevalence in head and neck cancer. We can see EGFR expression in 80% of the patients, and HPV positive oropharyngeal cancer 40% of the patients, and PD-L1 in 30%. So molecular markers are classified as diagnostic markers, prognostic markers, predictive markers, and response monitoring markers. So HPV P16 and RT response. HPV positive cancers are more radiosensitive, better survival, basis for RT de-escalation, and monitoring by plasma HPV DNA. EBV biomarkers in nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Epstein-Barr virus DNA titer in plasma is diagnostic and prognostic tool. EBVR in situ hybridization, that is a gold standard for EBV detection. LMP1 expression, oncogenic protein promoting proliferation. PD-L1 high expression in Epstein-Barr virus nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Immunotherapy shows the immunotherapy sensitivity, and its role in RT is to combine EBV DNA monitoring plus adaptive strategies. Now PD-L1 and immuno-RT. PD-L1 predicts the immunotherapy benefits and incorporation of the RT with immunotherapy in synergy, and the keynote 48 has shown overall survival in PD-L1 high patients. Then liquid biopsy and NGS. Circulating tumor DNA, HPV DNA detects the recurrence early, and it shows the real-time RT response monitoring, and NGS identifies ex-navel mutation in the recurrent tumors, and looking for the new targets when other treatments fail. Then imaging biomarkers and radiomics. Radiomics extract texture, pixel intensity, and shape features. PET SUV max and MRI ADC correlates with the hypoxia and aggressiveness. Radiogenomics link the imaging to the gene signatures, and the future is AI-based auto segmentation plus biologically adaptive radiotherapy. Here is the workflow, how to assess the biomarkers in head and neck cancer, and here we can see the overall survival curve in P53 wild type versus mutant head and neck cancer. So we can see the prognosis of the tumor on the basis of P53 marker, and here are the prognostic biomarkers, predictive biomarkers, then biomarker driven treatment algorithm. Then that is to make the diagnosis plus imaging, biomarker testing, and then RT planning. And according to the biomarkers, we can de-escalate or escalate the radiotherapy, and we can incorporate immunotherapy and targeted therapy. And adaptive radiotherapy plus monitoring of our response on the with the markers. So, to summarize the role of molecular marker in radiotherapy, HPV positivity shows radiocystic tumor and it advocates the RT de-escalation to reduce the radiation toxicity. T53 mutation that leads to the radioresistance and that needs the intensified radiotherapy approach. EGFR overexpression that shows the resistance to the radiotherapy and it advocates to incorporating the cetuximab along with the radiotherapy. And hypoxia marker that shows the poor response and there is a need of hypoxia modifiers and dose escalation. Now PDL1 expression that there is a need of radioimmunotherapy synergy. Here is a survival advantage incorporating the biomarker guided therapy. We can see clear advantage. And role of biomarker in radiation toxicity. Key biomarkers are genetic biomarkers ATM, BRCA1, 2, XR, CC1, inflammatory cytokines TGF, B1, beta-1, oxidative stress markers. So incorporating the biomarkers, with this graph we can see incorporating the biomarkers with our planning in the treatment of the head and neck cancer has shown clear improvement in the outcome of our treatment. Here is the survival improvement with the incorporation of the molecular biomarkers, and here is a prognosis of various biomarkers. We can see best prognosis in HPV positive patient PDL1 and worst prognosis with P53 mutations. Hypoxia imaging and liquid biomarkers like imaging film PET, liquid biopsy. So clinical role of hypoxia markers, they predict the resistance, select hypoxia modifiers, guide dose painting in radiotherapy, stratify patient in clinical trials. So high hypoxia markers shows the worst prognosis. So to summarize, head and neck cancer requires biology-based treatment beyond the TNM staging. HPV 16 superior prognosis and radiosensitivity, and radiomics and AI that shows the way for the adaptive radiotherapy in the adaptive radiotherapy. So the molecular markers are not just tool of diagnosis; they are window into the biology of the cancer, guiding us from uncertainty to the precision. And cancer treatment is no longer about one size fits all. Molecular marker give each patient their own strategy and their own hope. Thank you.
Myself, Mr. Anil Kumar Chauhan. As a to I explain here, introduction electron beam production, electron arc therapy, calibration of electron arc therapy, treatment planning, collimation in electron arc therapy, summary and drawback. Items by the variety of processing to Coulomb's force interactions. These are processed first in elastic collision with atomic electrons, ionization or excitation. In elastic collision with nuclei, Bremester-Lund, elastic collision with atomic electrons, and other is elastic collision with nuclei. An electron traveling in medium loss energy as a result of collisional and radiative process. First, collisional losses, ionization and excitation. The rate of energy loss depends on the electron's density of the medium. The rate of energy loss per gram per centimeter square, which is called the mass stopping power, is greater for low atomic material. And the radiation losses, that is Bremester-Lund, the rate of energy losses per centimeter is approximately proportional to the electron energy and to the square of the atomic number. Moreover, the probability of radiation losses relative to the original loss increase with the electron kinetic energy and with the atomic number. Electron beam production. How to produce electron beam? There is the two collimators. One is the photon energy source and other is the electron energy source. There is a process. The beam primary energy interact the X-ray and primary collimator. There is the ionization chamber. Before ionization chamber, there is the two corrosion and one more is the scattering and flattening filter. If you want to the photon energy, there is used for the flattening filter. If you want the electron energy, then flattening filter moves away and comes in front of the scattering file. The property of scattering file is spread the beam to the patient surface. What is the electron therapy? An electron beam arc therapy technique has been developed for the treatment of the post-mastectomy chest wall using a clinical linear accelerator modifier for the arc therapy. Problems encountered using stationary photon or electron fields to irradiate large chest wall areas includes like that excessive treatment of a sizable volume of normal tissue in order to encompass extended treatment portals on curved surfaces. And inhomogeneity of radiation dose at the abutments, variation of radiation dose throughout the treatment volume secondary to irradiate contours. And electron beam arc techniques give excellent dose distribution for the treatment superficial tumor along curved surfaces like chest wall. On the basis of isodose distribution, electron arc therapy is most suited to treatment superficial volume that follow curved surface such as the chest wall, ribs and entire limbs. Although all chest is mostly useful in case for which the tumor involves a large chest wall span and extended posteriorly beyond the maxillary lines. The conventional technique of using tangential photon beams in this case will irradiate too much of the underlying lens. That's why I am using the electron arc therapy. And the alternative approach of using multiple abutting electron fields in fraught with field junction problems, especially when angles beams are used. In short, it appears that for a certain class of case, electron arc therapy has no reasonable alternative. These are the field shaping. And main part is that electron arc therapy dosimetry. How to calculate the dose of electron arc therapy? There is the two methods. One is integration of a stationary beam, and other is the direct method, direct measurement for the cylindrical phantom. I will show you. First is integration of stationary beam profile. This method requires an isodose distribution as well as the dose rate calibration of the field under a stationary beam condition used for arcing. Radii are drawn from the isocenter to fix angular interval example for the 10 degrees moreover both sides. The isodose chart is placed along the radius while the dose at point P as function of the maximum dose on the central axis of the record. Let dose at the point of P be the dose of the iso chart is placed on the radius. This is the contouring of the isodose chart on that. And the dose per arc at point P is given by the following equation: drp d0 into d theta divided twice pi n summation of I is equal to 1 n dip and inverse square law that is I, where d0 is the dose rate per minute, n is the speed of the rotation, that is number of evaluation per minute, and the inverse square law correction factor. And other is the direct measurement. I used it previous at that time of near about 2013-2012 in TMH only, Tata Memorial Hospital. This is the method used over there. And in current scenario, in current scenario, no other center used this measurement. And this is the cylindrical phantom. Name is Elderson Rando phantom. It requires the cylindrical phantom of the suitable materials such as polystyrene or lucite material. A hole is drilled in the phantom to accommodate the chamber at the depth corresponding to the Dmax. And the radius of the phantom needs of curvature to present because only a small part of the contribution goes to the chamber reading. The depth of isocenter must be same as used for the treatment. The integrated reading per hour can be converted to the dose per hour by using correction factor normally applicable to the stationary reading. And this is the Elderson phantom. In between there is a hole for the ionization chamber to calculate the dose. The treatment planning for electron arc therapy includes first choice of the beam energy, choice of the field, and the choice of isocenter, field shaping, and isodose distribution. This is the beam energy. The central axis dose distribution is treated altered due to the field motion. For a small scanning field with the dose curve shifted slightly and beam appears to penetrate somewhat further for a stationary beam. And the surface dose is reduced and the perimeter length dose at the isocenter is increased. This phenomenon is known as the velocity affected. A deeper point is exposed to the beam longer than a shallower point, resulting in apparent enhancement of the beam penetration. Scanning field width. Although any field width may be used to produce acceptable isodose distribution, smaller scanning field width of the 5 cm or less due to lower dose rate and greater X-ray contamination. However, small fields allow almost normal incidence of the beam on the surface, thus simplify dosimetry. Another advantage of the smaller field width is that dose per arc is less dependent on the total arc angle. And for these reasons, a geometric field width of 204 to 8 cm at the isocenter is recommended for the most clinical situations. And the location of isocenter. The isocenter should be placed at the point approximately acquisition from the surface contour of the beam center. And in addition, the depth of isocenter must be greater than the maximum angle of electrons so that there is no accumulation of the electron load at the isocenter. And field shaping. Without electron collimation at the patient surface, the dose follow part the treatment field border is rather gradually. To sharpen the distribution, lead strips or cutouts should be used to define the arc limits as well as the field limits in the length direction. Cross shielding has been found to be useful of the routine electron arc therapy. This is the record isodose distribution arc rotation with the without lead strip at the ends of the arc using a section of an Elderson Rando phantom closely simulating at patient. Arc angle is like 236 degrees. Average radius of the curvature is 10 cm. Beam energy is 10 MeV. Lead strip thickness is 6 mm. Field size at the surface 4.2 to 8.5 cm. And the collimation electron arc is the must part of the collimation electron arc. Collimation plays an important role in electron therapy. Collimation is an electron therapy includes first primary collimation, secondary collimation, tertiary collimation. Tertiary collimation uses lead strip on the surface of the patient body, where is the criteria to treat on the chest wall. Lead strip are recommended to use for electron arc therapy treatment due to material's high density, 11.4 gram per centimeter square. And lead shielding attenuation to the dose of low energy electron isodose curves at the end of the treating contours. Electron energy used for the treatment is based on the calculation of treatment thickness to be treated. And lead strip 1 mm for each 2 MBB is recommended to use during treatment, and additional thickness of 1 mm lead sheathing is recommended to be added safely. And summary, electron arc therapy can be used as a valuable technique for the treatment of extended superficial fluids such as post-mastectomy chest wall. And electron arc therapy offers advantages in dose uniformity and reducing in dose to underlying lungs when compared to standard treatment techniques. And optimization techniques and variable degree offer further improvement in dose distribution. In consideration is given to factors influencing dose distribution in arc therapy. Good agreement can be achieved between computerized treatment plans and dose actually delivered. Since the dose distribution resulting from electron arc therapy are strongly depend upon the size, shape, and the construction of the primary, secondary, and tertiary collimation. Through dosimetry studies of the collimation system to be used on specific clinical accelerator should be completely before treatment using the technique institute. A drawback of electron therapy: first, after mastectomy, the irregularity of the surface of the patient body may increases. The anatomical structure of the body during treatment changes rapidly and doesn't provide a good support electron arc therapy. It is not regular seen to be get body contour of the patient to be cylindrical accurate. Hence, the electron arc therapy is not a regular practice in many studies. Thank you.
Shielding, yes, lead. Eye shielding, above is lead, inside what you put. Not lead, then lead inside the aluminum and protects. How you shield?
On the patient body,
How you shield lead? You have put lead, then yes, electron is there. So how you shield the protect electrons? Shielding, na? Shielding with this. First is lead,
electron chest wall.
and not handling and then.
Okay.
First is lead, then you have to put the electron coming from the lead also. So what else you will put?
सामने चलो
For the excellent talk.
वो किसी और ना Z6 ना बात मानो चीप नहीं है इसमें अभी दूध खरीदी है बस उसमें कहाँ बैकअप वाली है सर फेस में सर मानो फेस में ब्लड Look करना
Now I call on the stage Dr. Poonam Gupta ma'am. Poonam Gupta ma'am.
डन डन
Dr. S. Pradhan sir, Dr. Chandra Prakash Ujveshwar, Dr. Vajaspati Kumar Mishra, Dr. Rupali ma'am, Dr. Ashish Raj Ujveshwar,
in the time frame. So, starting with my topic is lung cancer management. How has the treatment evolved, and what are the current standards, and what are the emerging paradigms in its management? What change is the lung management? The 5-year survival still remains 17%. So why is that so? That is because most of the cancer cases in lung cancer are diagnosed at very advanced stage, and they carry a very poor prognosis at that. So my topic would be I will be discussing about the management of lung cancer, what has been going on, what is going on, and what will be coming on. So lung cancer is the leading cause of death in the lung cancer, and there are around 2.4 million cases new every year. The major types, broad classification is non-small cell based on histology, based on, so we didn't have any treatment, we were treating with surgery. But as the treatment has evolved in the last 2 decades, there has been a significant improvement, whether in radiation, whether in chemotherapy, and now we are treating it as a precision-based guided multimodality care. But still, the early diagnosis and management remains the key. The earlier we diagnose, the higher chance of survival is there. This is the historical evolution of the treatment. In the 1950s to 70s, surgical management was the main management, and other management like chemotherapy and radiation therapy was not that developed, or it still had a limited role. But coming to the 80s and 90s, concurrent chemoradiation became a standard of care in at least stage 3 lung cancer. Further evolution happened in last 2 decades, where targeted therapy, immune therapy, SPRT, all these came into, and gradually the prognosis started looking better. So how did we move on? So if you see that in the 90s we were diagnosing on histology. Later on, now what we are targeting? We are targeting precision medicine. And precision medicine didn't happen in one day. It was initially microscopic appearance, now we are moving towards tumor biology, tumor environment, driver mutation. So we are targeting that, and maybe we would succeed more. So so similarly the changes happen in the edition of the different editions of stages. When the 6th edition happened, we didn't have many evidences, many things, because most of the patients were surgical driven cohorts. Most of the patients underwent surgery, and based on that we had only cohort who had received surgery. But now we have a group of patients who have received either radiation, either chemotherapy, or combination of these, or surgery also. So what happens? Now we have a different cohort of people. Previously, when this 6th edition happened, we had only 5,000 patient database. Today we have 1,50,000 database in the 9th edition. So that is going to change. That is going to change the management. What has happened over a period of time? Previously, most of the tumor, nodal, and metastatic staging were clubbed together. Now they have been divided into 1 centimeter each. And similarly, the metastatic stage, whether it is locally in the thorax, or it is single site metastasis, or multiple site metastasis, or multiple metastasis, or the nodal staging, whether it is a single place or multiple places. So the evolution in staging, now we know much more about lung cancer, which we did maybe 3 decades back. So how did it happen? And I said we have data of 5,000 patients, now we have 1,50,000. So it is a data-driven refinement. Similarly, as we have segregated 1 centimeter and we have done refinement of TNM staging, so it is a more prognostic, improved prognostic accuracy. At the same time, we have amalgamated modern imaging and therapy. So modern imaging means PET-CT, functional imaging, EBUS. So now we have so many modalities of investigation which lead to a correct diagnosis. And at the same time, there has been evolution in radiation therapy, evolution in chemotherapy, evolution in targeted therapy, and that has led to integration of both. So as it represents a broad cohort, so it is clinically applicable across all the modalities. So maybe we are ready for a future ready framework where it will not be only TNM staging, it will be a TNM biologic staging. So this is the trend in 5-year survival over the last 5 decades. So what has contributed? So as we see, there has been improvement in survival. So what has been contributed? In the first 20 years, 1970 to 1990, imaging, surgical refinement, surgical techniques and staging. We were staging the patients better. So that led to improvement in survival. Coming on to the 1990s, concurrent chemoradiation became a standard of care along with better perioperative care, and that led to improvement in survival. Coming to the last part, in last 2 decades, we have developed more targeted therapy, immunotherapy and SBRT. So that has led to improvement in survival. But still the sad part is still in India we are doing bad. And what leads us to do that bad? Because our patients don't have the access to all the molecular tests. We are still treating patients on empirical basis, and that is one of the causes. And most of the cases in our country are diagnosed in advanced stage 3 or 4. And as I showed, it shows a poor survival. So how has the imaging, if you see, evolution has not happened in one day. It has been a continuous evolving. As a human, we are continuously evolving. We continuously search for new things. It is our urge to search for new things. Why is this happening? Why is this not happening? So what happened? We were not satisfied with chest X-ray because we were just seeing a lump in the X-ray. How to diagnose? Whether this is tumor, whether this is inflammation, whether this is consolidation, we were not doing. So gradually when the cross-sectional imaging like CT scan came, so what happened? We were able to see the location of the tumor, size of the tumor, everything we were able to do it. And based on that, our treatment also evolved. Up till that era, we were dealing with 2D RT. The most, in case of functional imaging, helped us a lot. Because when the PET CT came, the staging became much better. Because even with a small lung tumor, say of 2 centimeters, which we would say stage 1 or stage 2, but it has a metastasis, so it becomes stage 4. So that functional imaging led to the identification of that metastasis early. So we were able to stage patients better. So as a result, otherwise HRCT we can see whether the consolidation we could identify. So later on, if you see that in the last 2 decades, we have come with EBUS, we have come with next generation sequencing, we have come with circulating tumor DNA, MRI. So that has helped us stage patients better. So now coming to the evolution of treatment. So as I said, in the early part of the management, surgical management was the key. And what were we doing? As with breast, we were removing mastectomy. Similar with the lung, we were removing the entire lung, pneumonectomy. So what was there are high perioperative mortality. So as the evolution happened, our surgical modalities, our anesthesia care, our perioperative care, and our stapling devices all evolved. So how did we do? We thought that no, we don't require remove the whole lung. Maybe remove a lobe of the lung, that will take care of the disease. Gradually that evolution happened. So we were doing that. That became a standard with lung cancer study group trial. We came to that lobectomy can be the treatment of choice. There has been further refinements in last 2 decades. Now we are doing it either video assisted initially, and now we are doing it robotic assisted. So what has that helped? This has reduced morbidity. This has led to the faster recovery of the patient and equivalent oncologic outcomes. And with robotic assisted surgery, we have a better precision and ergonomics. So we have seen how the surgery has evolved. Similar in the case with systemic therapy. This has been the surprise package of management in lung cancer. Till 1960s, we didn't have anything, just supportive care to the patient. Then came the 80s and 90s when we started having some kind of systemic therapy, platinum-based systemic therapy. And later on, gradually over a period of time, gemcitabine, paclitaxel, these all groups of drugs came into, and gradually the management kept on evolving in systemic therapy. But the last 2 decades have been tremendous. And we have so many drugs where the targeted therapy, we have so many drugs, we can treat the patient. If patient gets resistance to one kind of drug, we treat with another kind of drug. If the patient has a progression, we treat that primary, give SBRT, that patient survives for a longer period of time. When I started my career, my lung cancer patients were surviving not more than 1 year. And now my medical oncology colleagues keep sending me the patient. इसका अभी यहाँ प्रोग्रेशन आ गया, इसको अभी ट्रीट कर दो, इसके बाद हम दूसरा सिस्टमिक थेरेपी देते हैं. सो दैट हैज बीन द ट्रेंड. So in the last 2 decades, I have seen that change, and maybe later on that change will happen again. So over a period of time, with the say introduction of biological treatment or tumor tyrosine kinase inhibitors, all these have contributed to the management. So is the systemic therapy limited to some particular way? No. It can be used as neoadjuvant with a borderline case. We can use it neoadjuvant, operate the patient. If the patient is not say fit for definitive CTRT, give definitive CTRT. Or you can use in adjuvant cases as well as palliative cases. So what has been the impact? As I said, in the 1960s we didn't have anything. Best supportive care, 2 to 4 months survival. What is now 24 months? More precise treatment, improved overall survival. Similarly, so I am a radiation oncologist, maybe I am biased towards radiation oncology, but I think radiation oncology has the most important role in case of lung cancer. Because there is no condition where we can't treat it. In stage 1, I'll give SPRT, stage 1, stage 2, I'll give SPRT. Stage 3, I'll give concurrent CTRT. Stage 4 is still palliative. If there is a say oligometastasis, 1 or 2 sites, I'll give SPRT to both the sites. Saber Comet trial has shown that if we are treating not only primary, even the metastatic, the response rates are better. So why don't we go for it? So we have that management. So different treatment techniques like RMRT, BMAT, MR-Linac, all these have kept evolving. So we have been, as I said, human nature is inquisitive. We keep on searching for something new. So where did we go? So we started 2D era. We started 120 years back. And we were kept giving at least for 100 years we were treating with 2D RT. We were just marking on the X-ray and we were just marking a field and we were happy treating that patient. So why did that happen? Because we didn't have imaging modality. We were restricted. We didn't know where the location of the tumor. So what we were doing? We were trying to play it safe. We were taking a bigger margin. So everything we pay. If you take a bigger margin, more toxicity. More toxicity means you can't give a higher dose. If you can't give a higher dose, tumor is not going to be cured. So gradually we put our focus on increasing the conformality. So we will be more conformal, we will be able to reduce the margin, and once we will be able to reduce the margin, the toxicity will come down. And once the toxicities come down, we can give a higher dose to the tumor, dose escalation can happen. So what happened? We gradually evolved into it. And newer treatment modalities we tried, like 3D CRT, IMRT, VMAT. We were not satisfied with something being here only. So after achieving what, there were limitations. 3D CRT were more simpler, IMRT and VMAT more complex. So because these were more complex, more treatment taking time, but the VMAT made a substantial difference. Margins became shorter, dose escalation became possible, conformity became much better. So, as I said, we were not satisfied because we had achieved a plateau with conformal RT. Then what to do? Then we went for beam delivery and dose conformity. And for that we came with these machines. Tomotherapy, CyberKnife, MR-Linac, ion therapy. Over the last 2 days we had discussion on MR-Linac. So different kind of modalities we are still searching what is the ideal. So why is that? So each modality has only 1 or 2 advantages. MR-Linac, very good soft tissue resolution, but you will be treating only 5 patients or 10 patients per day. That doesn't serve our purpose in a country like us. Ion therapy, good exit dose. Minimal exit dose, black peak, we are getting it. But how many centers can afford it? No. So CyberKnife, it is good for mobile tumors, and tomotherapy, it is for large and complex fields. So every machine has some limitation and some sites where it can be treated. So what is our so another treatment technique that has made tremendous change, especially in stage 1 and 2 lung cancer, where the site of the tumor is, and we can match our eyes with our surgeon colleagues that we are producing the equivalent results what a surgeon could offer in stage 1 and 2 lung cancer. We are a highly ablative, highly conformal and dose intensive RT. When you go to a JC, tell your surgeon colleagues, don't operate, I will give you RT. So when we tell that we have an equivalent outcome, we have an equivalent survival, they would be more than willing to listen to you if you are sure about your pathy. So first be sure about your pathy that I can do it, and then go to some of your colleagues and tell them that we can do it. So patient stage 1, stage 2 inoperable, then the patient could not, if the patient refuses surgery, you can tell him that you have an equivalent option in radiation therapy. So what happened? We have used numerous fractionation, right from 5 gray per fraction to 22 gray per fraction. And what has been the result? The results have been tremendous. Good local control, and that has transformed into a good overall survival. So, as I said, I talked to my surgery colleagues and saw this. They show us some paper where the radiation toxicity is happening. I saw that this paper we have a result. I don't vouch for that we are superior. We tell that still the surgery is the standard of, lobectomy is the standard of care in early lung cancer. But if your patient is not fit enough, if your patient is refusing surgery, we have the equivalent option in SAPR, SPRT. So these are the different challenges in lung management that have been dealt previously also, so I will not go into that. So there are different challenges in treating lung. And for that we have developed multiple techniques, 4D CT, motion management, respiratory casing. There are different kind of treatment options we have evolved. So what is the current standard? So take home message, the current standard is still, I said, surgery, lobectomy plus lymph node dissection, gold standard. We can use adjuvant chemo in select 1B or 2B lung cancer patients, and if the patient is medically inoperable, I have them option for SPRT. In case of locally advanced lung cancer, concurrent chemoradiation is the standard of care, and now after the Pacific trial, we have consolidation durvalumab for 1 year, and that remains the standard of care for stage 3 lung cancer. We can use IMRT, we can use IVRT for organ sparing and precision. Concurrent chemoradiation is not limited now to that particular part we were treating long back. So now we are integrating immunotherapy, we are trying neoadjuvant immunotherapy, concurrent immunotherapy and adjuvant immunotherapy. So we are continuously evolving as a human approach. Stage 4, we can use molecular guided systemic therapy like EGFR, Allotross, or we can use a combination of immunotherapy and chemotherapy, or in case of oligometastatic lung cancer, we can use local SPRT, and then we can use systemic therapy. So what is the emerging paradigm? Have we achieved all? No, still there is scope. So what we are trying to go? We are going to the genome of the patient. We are doing NGS for every patient. We are doing ctDNA. We are going for that. What we want to achieve? We want to map that this is the disease, this is the gene, this is the phenotype. So everything, this patient goes into this and this gene, patient will receive this treatment. So what we are targeting, what we are able to achieve, we are trying to give a specific treatment. When you give a specific treatment, less toxicity, more tolerance. If you give targeted therapy, you have more options left in the future. So we are trying to genomic profiling, right drug for right patient. Then we are going for what? Liquid biopsy. How will that help find the circulating tumor DNA? So if we do this ctDNA and still there is tumor load in the same blood, so what do we know? That still the disease is not controlled. It might look that the disease has regressed, but still the disease is present. So what to do? We are going into a phase where we will be treating lung not as a malignancy but rather a chronic disease. Like a patient needs a drug for diabetes, like a patient needs a drug for hypertension, we would be treating lung cancer on same line. We will be continuing maintenance chemotherapy, and that we can detect with this newer imaging this diagnostic modality. Ultimately, AI is coming into everything. So what is happening? By reading the imaging better, coordinate, this phenotype, this imaging looks like this genotype, ideal drug is this. RT planning, we were not very sure whether it is consolidation, collapse or what. So now with this kind of imaging, we can read the images better, we can contour them better. Other technological advances, adaptive RT, MRI guided RT, we already read. Proton therapy, if we have a re-irradiation case, or if there is a critical structure nearby, we can use proton therapy in those cases. As I said, we can use immunotherapy, we can use targeted therapy and radiotherapy in various combinations. Neoadjuvant immunotherapy with high CR rates. And in case of surgery also, we can integrate 3D imaging, AI-based navigation and ENAS protocols. All this will help in reducing the surgical morbidity. So what remains the key? So ultimately that has not changed. Never think that you can do everything. Talk to your colleagues. Talk to your medical oncologist, talk to your surgical oncologist, what is the best for the patient. And don't leave out your pulmonologist, pathologist and radiologist. They are equally supporting of your treatment. So these will help us decide what is the best treatment for my patient. And once we integrate this diagnosis to our survivorship, that will improve the outcome.
and then only we will achieve what we are supposed to achieve. Thank you.
In fact, we really miss yesterday's topic, panel discussion on lung cancer.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful talks.
Our next speaker is Dr. Saurabh Misra, and topic is the pertuzumab in breast cancer. Dr. Saurabh Misra, boss.
So, very good morning to all, and thank you, Dr. Chaturvedi sir, and whole conference team to provide me this opportunity. Talking about the in breast cancer. So, this is not about the drug, but this is about malignancy, that is breast cancer. And if I say that this is the one only common malignancy where the oncology has moved so way on that lot of treatment has came on the platform, and even they have shown the benefit. And breast cancer management is the best example of the multidisciplinary team discussion, where everyone has a major input, and that has definitely changed the survival of the patient. In the same way, regarding the drugs, and we are all well aware with the HER2 positive disease. So I am going in next 10 to 15 minutes discussing this, that how HER2 positive disease has changed since last 10 to 15 years. That initially starting with the trastuzumab, the magic drug discovered in 2000s, in the era of 2001 and 2002, definitely now has created a major difference. So this is about the data, and we are all well aware this is the most common malignancy right now in breast cancer in the females. Few points about the HER2/neu. Why we are talking about HER2 positive, and everybody has the same thing that we have to do ERP or HER2/neu always, and HER2/neu testing is very important, because if you see the curve, if a tumor is HER2 amplified, how the prognosis falls more than 50%, and it is considered one of the most poor prognosis disease if HER2 positive is there. So this was the unmet need initially, and gradually the discovery of the drug has created the difference, how HER2 was targeted, and we can see now the change in difference. So this is some basic, and this discovery was started way back in 1984, and now in 2025 we have now 2 or 3 drugs for targeting this particular HER2/neu overexpression in the breast cancer. So this is a real world phenomena that, okay, in the trials, in theory part, in other papers, we see that how many patients are HER2 positive in our clinic or in our hospitals. So in real world data of India from since 2011 to 2020, 30% patients in our setting are found to be HER2 positive if tested as per the CAP protocol and with proper specimen, with pathological guidelines, everything. Up to 30% we can see in our clinic. Sometimes even more we can see. Gradually I have seen a shift of HER2 positivity. It's gradually increasing somewhere. There may be some biological change in the phenomena of malignancy, but 30% is a real world data of India. And if you see how the evolution of the HER2 as a biomarker and target for treatment for breast cancer happens. So starting from trastuzumab since 1998, first time when it came, it has changed the survival of the breast cancer patient, and it has now, if you see in the 2022, even now in 2025, we have other than trastuzumab 3-4 molecules are there, and it has just not happened in a day. The pertuzumab drug or other drugs are since last 10 years and 15 years. Now they have shown the benefit after 5-6 years follow up, that how they have changed actually the survival in the curative setting, in the palliative setting, like in neoadjuvant setting, adjuvant setting, and in metastatic setting. In everywhere this blockade of HER2 agent has created. Trastuzumab has not been obsoleted, it is there, but with the pertuzumab and other drugs they have added the benefit. And in current era in HER2 positive, it's, I think, everywhere in the oncology practice in India, very common consensus. You have to start in early breast cancer with neoadjuvant, with dual target as per the guidelines, and then the surgery and radiation standard of care is right now. So there is no confusion. Important thing is that this is a part somewhere we are missing with the pathology labs, and gradually the collaboration between the pathologist and oncologist is happening, and now they are more aware and more cautious and more vigilant to detect the HER2 positivity. And now even 1+ HER2 can be targeted in metastatic setting. Gradually it will come in the neoadjuvant. But till now, still the 3+ and FISH positive, HER2 positive can be targeted with the anti-HER2 agent. So different important thing is why we need the second molecule. If we have a one molecule already, the trastuzumab is already there, why we need the second molecule? So as the science moves, we all know that it happens, why not every patient is responding fully with the trastuzumab. So definitely there was something missing. So when you go with the mechanism of the HER2 receptor, the important part is with the trastuzumab,